Good afternoon, boys and girls, and welcome to episode 91 of Love at First Scent with me, Persolaise, coming to you today live from YouTube. If you're watching the live broadcast, thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching the recording, thank you very much for watching the recording. Either way, please feel free to ask questions and leave comments. Persolaise has got a slightly croaky throat today, so just bear that in mind. But also the other thing, whoever is watching live, I want you to send as many positive thoughts as possible to this little corner of southern England, because the technology gremlins have been a little bit funny since last night, and I'm just keeping all my fingers and toes crossed that our internet connection is not going to break down. If it does, we'll just have to deal with it. We'll do the best that we can. So now, positive thoughts from everywhere around the world. Okay, what you guys have tuned in to today is another one of our live interviews. The subject of today's interview has very frequently been called a sort of rebel of the perfume industry or a renegade of the perfume industry, but perhaps we'll have a chance to ask him if he considers himself to be a rebel or a renegade. And he's a chap who, for quite a while in his career, was a sort of jobbing perfumer, working for a major perfume house, manufacturing, making perfumes for all sorts of brands. And then there came a moment, and I would like to ask him about that as well, there came a moment where he clearly decided that he'd had enough of all of that and he wanted to become an independent perfumer. His name is Geza Schoen. He's joining us live from Berlin, and you probably, well, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him and are aware of a lot of his work, but at the moment he's probably best known for this series, the Escentric Molecule series. For the 2 or 3 of you out there who don't know how this series works, the perfumes are released in pairs. So the first one was Molecule 1 and Escentric 1. And the way that it works is that Molecule 1 is literally just one single molecule diluted in alcohol, etc., and you just get that molecule presented to you as a pure aroma chemical, pure aroma molecule. And then Escentric, the Escentric variant, Escentric 01, is a perfume built around that molecule. The latest iteration, which we actually reviewed on an episode of Love at First Scent not that long ago, is Molecule 5 and Escentric 05. And in this case, the molecule is a synthetic musk called Cashmere. So Molecule 05 is pure Cashmere, diluted, and Escentric 05 is a fragrance built around Cashmere, and a fragrance that actually I seem to remember when we smelt it live, we appreciated it, we liked it, and we also liked the fact that its press release was very, very honest. Anyway, enough from me. The perfumer in question is Geza Schoen, and so here he is. Welcome very much. I need to slow down here. Huge welcome to the Persolaise YouTube channel. How are you doing? How is Berlin?
Good, sunny today, got 22 degrees, few fluffy clouds, amazing. If there wouldn't be COVID, it would be paradise.
And you're at home, right?
I'm at home, yes.
This is your sort of living room come study office, or?
Yeah, it's sort of inbound, sort of. I'm at the wall here of the flat. There is the sofa where we would sit at night. You can see down here my slobby sort of, I'm not great with keeping everything in order, but I always find everything if I need to. So it's formulas and books and stuff I need to have to work. Obviously, this is my computer screen where I work on. So this is where I sit and work and smell.
And where the inspiration comes. Thank you very much for effectively letting us into your home. We may have a chance to ask about minimalism in a few minutes, because I was wondering whether there is a kind of minimalist streak running through these, and so I was really, really curious to see what the interior of where you're talking from would be like, because there's a kind of hint of minimalism with a good sort of dose of mess thrown in there.
Absolutely, it's a bit messy, and but that's been my workplace here now for 10 years, and I'm just not very good in sort of keeping it clean like they would do at the council, where they have lots of things to put things in, to lock them away. It kind of like things go on top, and then every couple of years I clean it up, and then it's fine again.
Cool. Now, we have done a few of these interviews now, and as you know, we always provide an opportunity for all of you who've tuned in to ask some questions. Like I've said before, try and hang on to your questions for the moment, because if you post them now, then I miss them. We'll probably get to them in about 20 minutes or so. But I should also say that Geza has said that he would very much be interested in answering some questions that are a little bit off the wall. Throw him some curveballs, because he said that he gets tired of being asked the same questions again and again. No pressure on me, right? So try and think of some unusual, wacky, potentially controversial question. Let's put him on the spot a little bit. Okay. I've started these interviews that I've done over the last couple of weeks with an eye on the current situation. What do you think the role of perfume has been in the last few weeks, as so many parts of the world have gone into lockdown? Do you think perfume has been the last thing on people's minds, or do you think there's been maybe a renewed interest in perfume?
I think there is definitely a reduced interest in perfume, just because, I mean, people just don't really go out the way they used to before. So they don't go to the office, they don't go to restaurants, they certainly do not go to clubs or anywhere else where lots of other people are. And this would be the classic situation where you want to wear your fragrance and you want to show how you smell and what you like. And that's why I think it's not a good time for perfume. I mean, you can wear perfume for yourself at home, but who does that really? It's something, I think, which is you leave the house, you put on your nice jacket and your nice pair of shoes, you feel comfortable, and then so you would put on a fragrance. But as I said, now you stay at home. I think fragrances are suffering.
Have you been wearing perfume? Do you wear perfume much, or are you basically usually just wearing whatever it is you happen to be testing?
Yeah, it's more that I would wear stuff I'm working on just to see sort of performance on skin and to check out people's reactions. But there's just no. It's probably I'm working with fragrance every day. I'm smelling it every day. I'm in the lab every day. Sort of, I'm quite happy to not have a fragrance around. Like, for example, at home, I have done, but I would never really burn a candle which has a smell. Also because I have my lab in the flat, which is on the other end of the flat. If I only leave the door open, for a few minutes, the whole flat smells of perfumery lab. And I like it when it smells of food in here. When we cook, there's the kitchen, and it smells of fat and mushrooms and bacon and whatever we're doing. That's great. It reminds me to the times when my grandmother was cooking and the whole house smelled of food, because that's just the way it is, and I love that.
So maybe Escentric 06 is going to be some molecule that's the smell of bacon. Now, lots and lots of comments coming through. I'm not ignoring the comments at all, guys. I can see them, but just so that Geza are aware, we've got Johnny saying hi from Alabama, Andre saying greetings from Manchester, Chang is in Paris, Common Sense Fragrances is saying good morning, and Angeline is saying that she's managed to tune in from Singapore. Thanks very much, Angeline. We've got David from San Francisco. You've done well, David. That's a good early start for the west coast of the States. And Mohammed is saying hello from Pakistan. So it's fantastic that lots and lots of people have tuned in from around the world. Now, I'd like to take you back, if I may, Geza, because I know the sort of headlines of your career as a perfumer, but I've never really read very much about the detail. Was there a specific moment in, and I'm guessing it would have been at the sort of the early years of this century, was there a specific moment where you actually thought, that's it, I've had enough, I'm not doing this work anymore for these companies, I'm doing my own thing?
Oh, absolutely. That grew. I can tell you exactly when that was. How did that go? I worked in London, in Marlow, in Buckinghamshire for 3 years, between 97 and 2000. And it was clear that this role was limited because I was the only perfumer. I was only really working for the British market. So there was a kind of a limit to that at some stage. So my position there was replaced with Patricia Schuh, who worked in Holzminden back then in Germany. So she came to replace me. I went to New York, which was, was meant to be fabulous, but there was a real mess. The people there were just really talking lots of bollocks. There was really not much sense to get out of the situation, how they would develop and where their goals were and where they were heading for. So I only stayed 3 months in New York. But that also had to do with, I had just previously, months before I left to New York, I had fallen in love with a woman in London very heavily, Larissa, who's Canadian, and I was madly in love with her. And so I couldn't really wait to get back on whatever reason. So there was reason. I didn't feel well. I wanted to leave the US, and the only free position back then was in Paris. So I moved from New York to Paris 4 months later. So from, I think, May or June 2000, I was in Paris. And then the situation there with the company wasn't much better. So I decided, it took me 1 year to decide, right, I don't want to stay here any longer. I need out. And I had the idea that I would go back to London, where I had previously been living, where I really liked living. And I just quit. I said to them, look, I want out. And they were trying to keep me. They said, oh, we can give you more money, and oh, you can work now on more projects you want to be working on. But that was too late. I had made up my mind, and I just wanted out to see what could I do on my own.
And what was it that was so frustrating about being in that position, where you just...
It was very clear. We had terrible management back then. The management was the leftovers of Création Aromatique. There was one guy in particular, he just couldn't hack it. And the management situation was bad. Also, it was a conglomerate of various companies which had been come together. So Harman & Reimer was the mother company, but in the mid-90s, they bought Florissant, where Bertrand de Chauffour came from originally, and lots of other cool guys. Then they bought Création Aromatique and a couple of other smaller firms. And every time you throw cultures together who had been growing organically over decades and who had become what they were. And I thought it was always difficult to throw these companies together because, of course, all of a sudden you have, for one job, you have 2 or 3 people. So there was always going to be blood on the wall, as my friend Mark Buxton always put it. So let's quote him here. And that happened. And I was able to foresee that the next fuse would have been Dragoco with Harman & Reimer, which then a year later had happened, and to form Simrise. So I left at the best moment, I think. I wanted out. The future ahead wasn't looking good because, a big fusion with another big company is always shit. It's going to take years to calm everybody down. And that's why. And I also wanted back to London. I hated Paris, really didn't like it. So yeah, all these things together made me leave.
And what sort of time frame are we talking? Because I know that Escentric was launched in 2006, but I guess that must have been in development for a while. So when did you quit? When did you go independent?
Basically, when I left, I was independent because I wasn't with one anymore. So I was on my own. I connected.
And when was that?
That was exactly end of 2001. So 1st of January 2002, I was out. And I remember I left in my old Volvo 240, which was even back then already 25 years old. And I had my car packed full with my stuff. And I left Paris and I was crying. I was so happy to leave that behind me. So that was a real liberation in many ways. And I drove with a car to the Channel, hopped on a boat and went back to London. It was fabulous. I really loved that. And
don't hold it against me if the Paris Tourist Board comes after you now.
Well, no, that wasn't Paris on its own as a city. Even though I had hideous moments to realize how different the Parisiennes are to the rest of the world, but that was just more like a social sort of thing to realize, and it was fun to watch how different they are. But no, I don't mind Paris. I still like to visit and stuff. But I wanted to go back to London also because my girlfriend was back in London, so that obviously helped enormously.
Pulled along by love. So within about 4 years, or 4 years after that, you had a brand. Do you think it was inevitable that your going independent would result in you also having your own brand?
No, it wasn't inevitable necessarily. I think I mean, the idea with Escentric molecules is from 1990. That's from the day when I smelled Icy Super, and especially when I then tried it a couple of weeks later with this friend of mine. There's this famous scene, which I've talked about probably 1,000 times, when I gave Icy Super to my friend Michel, and he put it on his neck, drop here, drop there. We just stood in this bar, it took 10 minutes. This woman passed, stood still and said, "My God, who smells so nice over here?" So I then started talking to her, and it basically became clear that she liked Fahrenheit and she liked Trésor from Lancôme. And both fragrances had a big chunk of Icy Super. And I mean, same to me happened when I realized what Icy Super was. It did take me back to lots of fragrances which I liked, which all had a big chunk of Icy Super. So the idea that even to someone who likes fragrances as such, you can almost pinpoint them down to the fact that, hang on, you just don't like these fragrances because they are overall good fragrances. You like them because there's an ingredient in them you love. And this woman who was attracted to us standing there, you know, us two idiots on a Friday night with a beer in our hand, but one was smelling of Icy Super. And she dared to stop and to ask us who smelled so great. She could not have asked us. She had to. It was like a chore. She had to do it. And the outcome, as I said, with Trésor and Fahrenheit, I mean, that just explained to me that there was a magic ingredient in those fragrances, which nobody obviously just took on its own, because perfumery wasn't like that. You were always told, oh yeah, you have to combine things with each other, and fragrance has to be complex, and it has to have a top note and a heart and a base, and it has to have florals and this and that. And yeah, true. And you know, there's still lots of great fragrances around, and even new fragrances which are nice. But that one step to just go down to this one particular ingredient and allow yourself to just, you know, have just this. And the same, like I had to explain over the years, you know, when people ask me, so how did you create Molecular One? And I keep saying, I didn't create it. I just decided that this one particular aroma chemical is good enough on its own. And here's the proposition. You can have it in a bottle. If you like it to be a bit more complex, you can have Escentric, which is an homage to the molecule I've done. And so you can have a more complex, or you can have the ultimate linear version of a scent in a bottle. That was it.
And I guess the last decade, the last sort of 14 years have proven you right, because certainly Escentric 01, or Molecular One, has turned out to be a real big cult hit. But I'm really, really fascinated to picture the moment or the meeting, the day when you decided you were going to do this. Now, I don't know much about the sort of background of this brand. I don't know whether you had investors, backers, or whatever. But did you not for a moment think, should I be doing this? Did anybody, for example, say to you, hang on, Geza, this is cheating?
Yeah, this cheating. I mean, yeah, if there would be the Bible of perfumery where it says, you know, in the preamble, there's a law, which is, don't give people just one molecule, it's cheating. That would have been different, but this doesn't exist. So therefore, it's like my friend Helder Suffenplan has probably formed the best sentence about it. It's like he's comparing it to Malevich Black Square, yes. Which, of course, if you look at it these days, you know, a child as well as a grown-up would say, well, I see a black square. What's so arty about it? But then it was, because it was at the time when nobody did dare to do that. I mean, you can also call Jackson Pollock an idiot, but he isn't. And so everything has got its reason for many reasons why things at a certain time make sense. And I think like in '94, when there was the only chance that actually the concept of eccentric molecules I would have given out of my hands, was when we were working on the first diesel fragrance back then with Alessandro Gualtieri as the sales guy in our firm. And I said to him, and I was just a trainee back then, I said, look, there's Ice3 Super as you know it. Why don't we show Ice3 Super to the diesel guys who were very flamboyant, hip, sort of Dutch guys who did the fashion for the, I mean, I think for the coolest brand there was back then. in the world. And he said, no, I think that's even too far-fetched for them. So I just didn't give it to him. So I kept it to myself. That was in 94. And then 10 years later, when I met the right people in London, I thought, I'm going to present them my idea. And no, we had no backers. We bought 5,000 bottles. We bought 5,000 pump sprays. We entered Linda Pilkington's workspace in London at Almond Jane.
Of Almond Jane.
So,
Yes.
right, so she allowed us to sneak in. And she said even years later, her place smelled of icy super. And she just gave us the opportunity to do it at her place. So we had a crimping machine. I had, I don't know how many hundreds of kilograms of concentrated fragrance I did myself in her lab. So I was pouring big canisters on large scales, trying to weigh it sort of okay. And we filled every bottle ourselves because it was, I mean, you know, I took my savings from my account to buy these things. And I just thought, let's just do it.
I can only see you on a small screen, but even on the small screen, it looks like your face is sort of lit up when you're talking about this. Was it an exciting time?
Oh, look, it was very exciting because, I mean, I knew that ISO-E, there's something magic about it, of course. If that happened already 25 years ago, no, 15 years ago, with that little test, you know, that was no coincidence. That was, other people would have the same reaction. So I thought, but it's like, well, how do you sell a product to someone when 90% of the people would say, yeah, but I can't smell anything? You know, how would you get them to buy a bottle? So this is why it's good we had Escentric 01, because that anyone can smell. And then there were just a few sort of interesting moments when Daniela Rinaldi, the lady who was heading the buying department at Harvey Nichols back then. So we presented it to her. We said, look, we have these two bottles. One is Molecule, one is Escentric 01. Do you want to sell it for us? And she was like, yeah, but it's just two fragrances. We like to have a full range. And she said, yeah, okay, but give it a go. You know, so she put some on her wrist and left. And so I think she took a cab to the tube station, or she took a cab to wherever she had to go. The cab driver said, oh, darling, you smell nice. What is that? And she was like, well, can you smell this? She said. And so she was surprised. And then she gets out, she walks to the flower shop, and the lady at the flower shop goes like, oh, darling, you smell amazing. What is that? So it just carried on for the rest of her day. And she came back next day and she said she placed the biggest order she had ever placed for Harvey Nichols, the fragrance department. Basically, she bought like 1,000 bottles each or something. And we were like, can't believe that. And then some people started wearing it, and we got a bit of press, and it slowly kicked off. But then one of the guys who was working for us back then, he was a big dude in the fashion world. And he started wearing the fragrance, Escentric 01. So within a very short moment of time, that created a kickstart within the fashion world. And that's probably a good place where you, want to lay out a product or anything you have to get some feedback, some instant feedback.
Now, we should talk about the latest one, which is based around the Cashmere molecule. There are lots and lots of aroma chemicals out there. So I would imagine it must be quite hard for you to decide what the next one is going to be, or am I wrong? You know, did you immediately sort of think, yeah, it's got to be Cashmere? How did that come about?
No. It's very difficult because I would never launch, especially a molecule, without being absolutely 100% sure that it actually works, which means it doesn't need a second molecule next to it, or a third or a 10th one. So singular molecules have to be complex in their structure. And I think every single one we've launched has complexity. Cashmere, obviously, because it's also been around since the 70s, I think, is widely used. But I think I wanted to stay within the woody side of things, because woody notes to me are the most sophisticated. I'll never become bored by them. And I think they also smell best on skin. I mean, for example, I was thinking about patchouli or patchoulol. You know, you can fractionate these oils these days, but then it's a bit crass, and you find some lovers, but you find lots of haters. So Cashmere is very complex. It's got so many facets. I do find it actually a little more on the woody side than on the musky side. It's kind of a hybrid between the two. It has both, which again is amazing for a singular molecule to have these facets in one. And yeah, it works on skin, and it also was the start for the fragrance, because it has there's one particular aspect of pine sitting in Cashmere, which then fitted so well for the concept of the Escentric 05 fragrance. And that altogether made me think, let's just do it.
And this is the idea of your Mediterranean villa, is that right?
Yeah, it's not a villa. It's a dog's hut. It's really tiny, and this is all about the view we have from there because it's so high up, and that's what we're enjoying. The house is not connected to any electricity or water, so we do this all ourselves there. But yeah, on the way to the house, there's this old Roman cobblestone path which leads you to sort of, you know, next to flowers and woods and bushes and trees which are hundreds of years old, and you can almost see how the bark is, you know, like an old olive tree, sort of this bark over the hundreds of years develops, and how it becomes sort of really ingrown and dry, and the way to this little house there made me think of that this environment actually has lots to offer. Next to these old woody smells, there was always this floral smell. There is a fig tree on this ground, and some herbs which grow there. So I'm not a big fan of sort of telling a story from a place, especially because, you know, when people say, oh yeah, we have now we're in Singapore, now we're in Berlin, and now we're in Paris, and now we're in London, and now we make a fragrance which smells like the city, I find it difficult, because just olfactorically, these places sometimes don't give you enough to actually say, oh, this is Singapore for you. When I would say, well, hang on, you know, another perfumer would do this completely different. So kind of like, what's the word? An objective feel for everyone to see, you know, they go, oh yeah, they're saying this is New York. Yeah, this is New York. It's a bit arbitrary. But for Escentric 05, because of maybe the Mediterranean area, because of the uniqueness of the floral word, there's labdanum, they are growing, you know, the rosemary is growing wild. And so it has an olfactoric fingerprint to it, which I find really identifiable, original. And that's when I thought, I mean, when I started working on it, I thought, yeah, I can actually do that with the stuff I find there. I can create a moment which hopefully to other people, when they smell that, can go, I can see that. That's what I'm after.
What I think, because I did smell this live on a sort of earlier episode, and the people who were watching at the time, we all appreciated the clarity of the press material, because as I was smelling it and reading it, I was thinking, yes, I get this, I get that, and I wonder if as well you feel that there is something about Cashmere that has a kind of ancient quality. I like your description of those trees and the bark that's kind of twisted and gnarled, because there is something quite old, ancient smelling about Cashmere, isn't there?
Absolutely. Cashmere has so many aspects. I mean, I remember still sitting here like 1.5 years ago. I always had here, my little clip holder sits on the top of my computer, and it always had Cashmere on it. And I had a piece of paper laying here where I made notes. And there was so many notes, because it doesn't smell same every day, because things happen. The weather's different. The food you've had is different. Your one particular point of, you know, your one cell at this day is just particularly awake. Or so there's always lots of things which are different, which gives you lots of different impressions. And about such a complex molecule like Cashmere on top of it, I had a list which was like really long. So I tried to frame this into a concept, which then with this Mallorca thing just worked perfectly. And I think I used about 15% of Cashmere, and it was enough to give it the creaminess it has, as well as the dryness, as well as this particular pine note, and as well as giving it a bit of this musky effect it has. It all fits it in. And that's when I go, I don't have to shit myself here, or I don't have to lie to myself. I can really work on that, and I'm fully behind it. And only then it's fun.
Right. Now, I always say that in a Persolaise interview, we have to play a little bit of a game. But the game is going to be a shortened version of my 20 blotters. So because we've got lots to talk about, we're going to do 10 blotters for Geza. And this also, folks, is a good time for you to start sending your questions in. I should also say at the half-hour mark, you're watching episode 91 of Love at First Scent with me, Persolaise. And today we're very grateful that perfumer Geza Schoen has given up his time. He's coming to us live from Berlin. If you haven't already subscribed to the Persolaise channel, please consider doing so. Thumbs up, hearts, likes, etc. are appreciated. And if you're watching the recording, please feel free to leave a comment, ask a question. But while the good people around the world are thinking of some questions for you, Geza, can you give me 5 numbers between 1 and 10?
Me?
Yes, because I'm going to be choosing from a card here. Go on.
1.
1. 4 more.
6.
Yes.
8.
Yes.
10.
1 more.
5.
Okay. So what you have got to do here is complete the following sentences. One of my favorite smells in the world is...
The smell of my daughter.
Good answer.
Who's 3.5, and that's just amazing.
If only people who buy perfume would...
If only people who buy perfume would take more time to decide what they're buying.
Okay. The perfume industry needs to...
Oh my God, the perfume industry needs to stop stealing ideas from niche brands.
Okay. Without perfume, my life...
Without perfume, I would say without perfume, my life would be okay. Without being able to smell, my life would be over.
Okay, good answer. Modern perfumery is...
Modern perfumery is not really anymore existing because everything's been exploited and duplicated and twisted and worked on. So that's why modern perfumery was more in the 80s and 90s, when modern new chemicals would still appear you could use to make new effects and fragrances with. But the research departments of all the big firms who are looking for new molecules have looked at everything there is possible. And I think there's more new naturals or fractions of naturals coming into play than real new aroma molecules.
Do you stand by that? Do you mean that when you say that there is no real identifiable modern perfumery?
Well, I mean, no, there isn't, because already in the 80s, on the 90s, there were fragrances made which I would still consider being modern. I mean, the fragrances I smell these days, they either are full of oud with rose and patchouli, sort of this classic triple accord with oud, which I find okay, but I wouldn't really say this is really modern. It actually smells quite old-fashioned, I think. Then you have a couple of other accords which gets sort of like, you know, masticated and looked at and worked on again. And so, no, I wouldn't say there is modern perfumery these days.
Do you think this brand, do you think Escentric is futuristic?
Yeah, in comparison to most brands, I would say definitely futuristic, because, well, for the first time, obviously, people have the chance to wear a single molecule, which, you know, that was new, and particularly the ones where I feel they're really wearable and you would get compliments on that. And then for the ones, you know, who like a bit more the complex state of a fragrance, they can have the homage to the molecule, which is my interpretation of what I would do to show the molecule in a fragrance at its best. And I mean, yeah, certainly looks-wise, I think there isn't one other brand which looks so arcane and off the planet than our look. I think that I would have to confess.
To finish off the game now, give me 5 numbers between 1 and 12.
11, 12, 8, 6, and 1.
Okay. These are very, very quick. I'm going to name 2 things, and you have to say which one you prefer. The past or the future?
I will have to say the future.
Okay. I think we know the answer to this one. London or Paris?
London.
Okay. Abstract or concrete?
Oh, that's really hard, man. I mean, both sometimes is absolutely reasonable. I can't decide for one, sorry.
Fine. Coca-Cola or Dom Perignon?
Oh, definitely Coca-Cola.
Okay. And
I like champagne, but a bottle of Dom Perignon, I find a bit too expensive. There's other good stuff which is much cheaper. Yeah.
Okay. And last one, main course or dessert?
Main course.
Okay.
I like sweet.
Go on. No, go on.
No, I like sweet. I mean, I like dessert. I like chocolate. I like gummy bears. That's all fine. But yeah, no, I would concentrate on the main course.
Let's take some questions from people now. And if you would like to share where you are based and where you're asking the question from, it's always really, really cool to find out where you are. Anyway, let's start with a question from Mary, who says, if you had a brief that said, create the scent of the surface of the moon, how would you approach it?
I would first try and see if I can find somebody who's got a piece of stone from the moon, because I think they've taken a few from some of these visits to the moon. And I would probably hack on it with a hammer, and if I'm allowed to destroy it, just to see if I can get anything out of that. Other than that, it becomes, again, completely arbitrary. And then it really depends on who's the perfumer you ask, because even that people would sort of interpret completely differently. And I like to have an original piece or something I can hook on, which then is enough for me to start creating something.
Do you always have to ground what you're working in some kind of reality? Would you never, for example, sit down and say, I'm just going to imagine what the moon smells like?
Yeah, of course I can do that, but I find that a bit easy. You know,
okay.
That's when I say it becomes arbitrary. And that to me is something I like to be more, I like sometimes rational things and things I can grab and something I can have a good hook to start something from, rather than, oh yeah, today I'm gonna make the fragrance of the moon. Yeah.
Okay.
You know, yeah, I could, but no.
Okay. This is a question from Common Sense Fragrances. Geza, what's your role with Almond Jane now? The Silk Road series seems quite different from their other releases based on the notes listed. Are you still in a sort of collaboration with Linda Pilkington?
Yeah, I am. Always have been. Fun thing to do. The Silk Road, you know, Linda also these days, I mean, she has broadened her mind and her capacity of perfumery. So she's done various courses and she's really very interested in lots of the ingredients. So she has started playing around with fragrances herself. So sometimes I don't know some of the new things she's launched, which she probably has played with herself, which is absolutely fine. I haven't got a problem with that at all. It's her brand. She's so welcome to do with it what she wants. And if my help is required, she knows where to get me, and then we would work on a fragrance together. But no, I can't say too much to this. This is the first time I hear that.
Okay. Question from Serbia. Arkadiusz says, hi from Serbia. Let's have some fun. He says, which fragrance would Geza recommend to a dictator so he would become a fragrance addict and leave office and politics, and I could take credit for saving my country? There is so much going on in that question. I don't even know where to start. But they've taken you seriously, Geza. They've given you... So what perfume would you recommend to a dictator so that he stops becoming a dictator? I think.
I think, first of all, dictators probably aren't really in tune with their sense of smell. That's what I would think. Funnily enough, there's a horrible anecdote which jumps to my mind. There was a guy who told me once that Hitler probably stank out of his mouth because apparently, like in the early 30s, he'd been going to a dentist to say, can you make me all new teeth because I can't come in for the next 10 years, which of course is horrendous to listen to. But so, I mean, obviously I would think these days that each dictator would stink out of his mouth. And you know what? If you're a dictator, I think you're meant to stink out of your mouth because in most ways you're an asshole. So, that's probably why I couldn't unfortunately recommend anything to give to a dictator to become sane again, because that's unfortunately not how it works, I'm afraid.
Question from Angeline, who I know is based in Singapore. She says, is there a perfume you remember really disliking in your youth that actually became one that you admire today? There's something that maybe
No, it actually didn't, because in my youth, which goes back now to the 70s and the 80s, there weren't many fragrances around. So I think I was grateful for any fragrance there was in those days. When I started collecting in the early 80s, there wasn't just much to grab, and fragrances were just rare. And, there were some big brands, they just didn't even have one fragrance yet. So, no, I was interested in everything. And I collected them. And no, I mean, all these old fragrances, if I smell them these days, they probably all make me smile because they all bring me back to the 80s or the early 90s when I got really into fragrances. And I also thought some of these fragrances back then had lots of character, as were some of the fragrances these days. They either a duplicated character of an old idea, or they're just not that interesting. So,
what did you used to enjoy wearing as like a younger man? What did you used to enjoy wearing yourself?
I can tell you, I remember I walked into a perfumery and I bought a small bottle of cool water in '88 when it came out, because I thought, wow, that's really a totally different freshness. I even had a bottle of Fahrenheit myself, small one. I couldn't afford the big one, so I bought the small ones. And that was probably it, because I then got in touch with Harman & Reimer, and they kept sending me samples of new fragrances which had just entered the market. So I was able to pick from those to try some new out. But so my own fragrance wardrobe in the 80s was very little, because I had no money. I mean, I just couldn't go into a perfumery and buy a bottle. That was impossible.
It's a good time for this question then. Potentially interesting question, I don't know. This is from Ashfaq, who says, what's the rationale behind charging the same price for Escentric 01 and Molecule 01? How come they both cost the same in a shop?
That was just like a rational decision we've taken from the beginning, that we weren't trying to reflect the content of the bottle into the end price. If we had done this, then the bottles would all have such a different pricing. That would be really complicated. And then in the shop, the lady selling the products would have to explain why there are these gaps between different products. So it's no, they're all the same price pretty much.
So the cost that doesn't necessarily reflect what the sort of cost of what's gone inside. Linda's asking a question. Developing or making an observation, developing futuristic fragrances must be challenging, as fragrance can be so sentimental and emotes what it emotes the past. In other words, it's like, how do you make the smell of the future? Again,
we're entering the world of arbitrariness. It's something you can't, unless there's something, let's say, for example, I mean, some people have made a fragrance of Berlin. I haven't smelled them all, but just recently your friend from Gallivant, you did this fragrance interview with. I think he's done a fragrance for Berlin. I haven't smelled it, but for example, Berlin is one of the rare examples where you have actually a big hook. Only Berlin smells of linden blossoms. When they start blooming, sort of mid-May, end of May, beginning of June, the whole city smells of linden blossom because we have so many trees here. And this smell is very typical for Berlin because in the very beginning, when the blossoms come out, it's very mimosa, fresh, cucumbery, really light. Almost there's a freesia aspect to it, as where over the next few weeks and months, they become really heavy. The longer and the hotter the summer becomes, these blossoms go into something really thick, honey, mimosa, really sweet and almost too heady to bear. That's a typical Berlin note, as where any futuristic fragrance, yeah, I mean, you know, I've done this and I have worked on really futuristic ideas, and I can show you fragrances you've never smelled before, but would you wear them? Probably not. Have you smelled anything like that before? No, but still, who am I to say, here's the future? It's a bit tricky. And with no other thing but fragrance, we are so grown into our past experience with what we've learned culturally, socially, the way my socialization was different to yours, to anyone else who's listening to us today. This is your paradigm, your socialization of fragrance you've grown into. You carry this as a treasure, and you will always measure other fragrances and other things you smell and eat based on this. And it then depends, how open are you towards new things? How closed are you in with, you will only like the things you've liked so far. I can't break this up. I can make weird fragrances, but I would never say, I herewith predict the future and it smells like this. I would find this absolutely arrogant and idiotic. I wouldn't be part of that, I'm afraid.
This question's kind of related, it's from Mary. Do you find in your work that there is a struggle to create something that's experimental, original, and something that has mass appeal to the market? Is there that kind of tension in you? Totally.
I mean, of course, you know, if I get a briefing from a mass brand, I can't show them something where I say, this is what I think is the future going to be smelling like. You know, so things for mass brands always will have to reflect something we have smelled already, because otherwise they couldn't earn a quick buck. It's, you know, people, you want to catch them in duty free or in the perfumery where you have millions of other fragrances and somebody holds various blotters under your nose and goes, do you like this? Do you like that? And with a third fragrance already, people go, oh, I can't differentiate. So if it's a mass brand, you will have to give them something which will work for a mass brand. If it's a designer, if it's a new brand, if it's a brand or an individual, an artist who's a bit more daring, you can do something more daring. But I would really differentiate between the two. So actually, again, good point for this. Couple more questions and then we'll leave you in peace. Fun with Frank says, Kinski, it's so different. What was your creative process on that one? That's a much loved perfume in a certain circle, isn't it? Yeah. Well, the briefing for Kinski was great because nothing had to be said. There was a guy, a mad actor with a mad attitude and certainly very much sort of feral origins. I mean, you know, somebody who you couldn't control. So the fragrance feral actually was one of my top words for the briefing I gave myself, almost like animalistic. It had to be leathery. It had to reflect drugs, which is why it had, you know, there's a white wine accord in there I put in. There's a marijuana accord in there. There's lots of leather. There's lots of animalic stuff, which is really dirty. It had to have patchouli. It had to have vetiver. That was very clear. It was just fun doing this because the briefing was so clear how that had to smell. And that's why for Kinski, there was not much talk needed to start doing this.
So it's quite clear. You've got at least one fan here. Now, my knowledge of the Cyrillic alphabet isn't perfect, but I think that the name here is Alexa. Alexa saying, it is happiness to see your favorite perfumer in real time.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Definitely, very, very sweet. And let's finish with this one then from Stefan. Are there any perfumers that you look up to?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are a few jump into my head instantly. I mean, Darius, we spoke about it earlier. Certainly, Michel Almerac would be one to mention, just because he came up with Fahrenheit. That was his original idea. And he did lots of other cool stuff. He did a couple of really odd ones where I really don't understand at all why he did that. But he's one of the greatest of all times, no doubt. My two friends, Mark Buxton and Bertrand Ducheffour, are both great perfumers, which is why it was absolutely lovely to create Project Renegades with them. Exactly. I could have only done that with the two. That was
what happened. We never got a second perfume from the Renegades.
Yeah, I tell you what, we did plan to do more, but it's proven, or it turned out that we might have gone a bit too far with Project Renegades, with it all together. Yes, there are certain people who appreciate that, but then these are people like you or me, or all these aficionados who tune in, wanting to listen to what we got to say about perfumery. So the real ones who are really interested in perfumery, yes, they are interested and they like it, but then to bring that out on a bigger scale, very difficult. So I don't know whether we're ever going to do a second edition. I mean, we had already a topic for that. The Renegades Go to Space, which then would have been very much about a very futuristic fragrance. And
yeah.
I'm sure Marc and Bertrand would have come up with something amazing. But listen, there are lots of perfumers who, some of them have only done one fragrance in their life, which I admire or which I look up to. But yeah, there are several really cool perfumers out there, absolutely.
At least one person has been very much enticed by your description of Kinski. Linda says, I need to get my hands on some Kinski.
I will have to tell you guys some bad news. It's been discontinued now. Because, various problems occurred. The bottle we used, they don't make it anymore. And various couple of other things. I also would have to rework the fragrance these days because of restrictions. That's always a bad thing, if you have a great original formula and then you have to start fiddling with it and replacing ingredients. I mean, who's perfumer, who would love to do that? It's always difficult. So
we can't end on a note like that, though. Let's try and end on a positive. Are you optimistic about the future when we come out of this? When is Escentric 06 going to emerge?
That I have no idea. I think we know what to do, but it's not as easy as that. It's a molecule which is very unstable, and we would have to conquer some other problems, solving that first to then go, okay, we're ready. We can actually launch it and people can use it properly. But yeah, there might be one or two more, but then to be honest with you, we end up where I've always said 99.9% of all ingredients actually need the help of other ingredients to perform. Right. And if the molecule doesn't do that on its own, I'm not going to put it in just for actionistic reasons. We're not doing that. But we will come up with something new very soon.
But not from this range.
And yes, it's connected to it, and it takes one particular part, and then we're doing something with it. So we're not doing so we are launching a new range very soon, which is very exciting, I think. Either this autumn, depending on how Corona goes, latest next spring.
Okay, you heard it. Well, I don't know if you heard it here first, but you heard it here. And I'm just going to try and get you to give us a hint about 06. Is 06 going to be more on the quiet side, or because these perfumes seem to be getting bigger? Because 04 was Javanol, which of course is pretty huge. Cashmere is also quite big. Are you still kind of going big, or are you going to try and tone it down again?
No, the next one, if we were to do it, is very much toned down.
Okay, interesting.
very subtle thing, a very subtle thing in perfumery.
Okay. Geza, I can't thank you enough for being such a good sport. Thank you very much for giving us your time, for answering everybody's questions. Thank you, all of you, for tuning in and for sending in all of your questions. I certainly found a lot of them interesting. As I say, if you haven't subscribed to the Persolaise channel, please consider doing so. And please do check out all the usual social media channels. We've got another interview lined up for next week, but you'll need to go on to persolaise.com to find out who that's going to be with. And until then, stay safe, look after yourselves. Thank you, Geza.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Appreciate it, Darius. See you soon, man.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.